I want to come back to a comment that I made earlier, I think in both podcasts before. Let's see if I can move you here. There we go. Um, this is a human fetus, and it looks more like a dinosaur. There you can see the foot and you can see the fingers, but look here. This is the highlight here is that at this level, when you were in utero, this is, I think, probably in the first couple of weeks, is what a human fetus looks like. Look where the heart is. That red glowing center is the heart. It is in the lower abdomen. And, I can talk, if you go into the history of Westerners that have tried to kind of grasp very similar ideas, um, Freud, you can go back to Freud. Freud believed that the subconscious were your internal organs, that it was the involuntary nervous system and the organs that are down there pumping and digesting and secreting enzymes and so on, and as well as the heart. Um, then you go into the 20th century, you get Carl Jung, you get Wilhelm Reich, another wild guy, but his their stuff is very similar to traditional Chinese medicine. And if you go back into the Middle Ages in Europe, go back into, and also um, African, South American, so-called primitive medicine or magic, you find parallels to traditional Chinese medicine and to medieval medicine. It was like this ancient knowledge based on the body and based on energetics. So there are Western people that have kind of sniffed around this. But what I find interesting is that you can look at the morphology of an embryo and see that your heart started around your navel, where your umbilical cord is. And very interestingly enough, my teacher, original teacher, Wang Junhua, said that when you feel the pulse below the navel, his expression was yo haizi, and there's the Chinese characters for it, which means have child. And this gets me to the system that, and this people should not underestimate the degree to which mainland Chinese have embraced this traditional practice. What we get are these sort of wash off commercial efforts of people trying to export it and teach it to people in the West to make money. But mainland Chinese uh, authorities had access to the very highest levels of knowledge. They sequestered this stuff in institutions and they studied it scientifically. And they have knowledge of this stuff that goes far beyond what anybody in the West even suspects. And I have some friends in Singapore and Japan who, they know Chinese and they interact with Chinese people, and they've told me some really surprising things. And if you remember, Billy, when I first started teaching, I introduced you guys to kind of a magical level of Qigong, and it was pushed forward by a guy named Yenxing. And I,
Okay.
I had like a little pamphlet that I printed for you guys, and it were all these like wild claims about how he could denature radioactive isotopes from 1,000 kilometers away
Wow.
and just things like that. And he was discredited. And I almost think it was like a government campaign to discredit him because they did not want people in the West to know what they were up to. And I'm not going to get into this in future podcasts. I have evidence that this is true. But anyway, the reason I'm focusing on this is that, and particularly this style of Qigong is called Zhineng, was that in 1999, after my first book was published, actually it's 1998, I was invited to go to China at a very high level, and I met with the guy that was in charge of all Qigong. And he had me sit for 3 hours in front of the representatives of the Zhineng Qigong system. I had lunch with them as well, and they presented this scientific study that involved over 5,000 people. And only in China could you get away with this. So they just rounded people up and moved them onto a military base, and they
Okay.
forced them to practice. They said, you are going to participate in this. They all had diseases. They had 220 different kinds of diseases.
Wow.
They gathered them up, because they have such control over their people, and they're also really cooperative, kind of like the Japanese would cooperate too if they
Right.
did something like this. So they gathered them up, put them on a military base, and studied them over a course of, I don't know, maybe a year of them making them do Zhineng, and they had psychologists on board that would kind of counsel them through mental problems that they had. But anyway, they then produced a flawed medical report, and I had a doctor with me go over it, and it just wouldn't have passed muster with
Okay.
medical scientists in the U.S. Um, but the fact is, they had this enormous amount of data, and even though it didn't fit, neatly into the little boxes that we have created in the West, this is what constitutes an actual valid study and so on. It was tremendous amount of data. And they were curing things, they were claiming to have
Huh?
cured things like esophageal cancer, pancreatic cancer, really serious diseases, and a whole bunch of different ones. And the findings were kind of really amazing. And, when I brought it back, it was dismissed by UVA medical doctors. I showed them the stuff and they were like, no, they didn't do the study right.
Right.
But instead of going like, well, let's go back and examine this data. So this was 98. About a year later, Falun Gong happened.
Right. I know
Falun
that.
Gong exploded. The Chinese
Yeah.
shut down the entire discussion of Qigong. You can't even get access to this information anymore.
Right.
So I was really lucky in that I was privileged to be shown this. And for me, I didn't need to be shown because I had already seen a picture of an embryo just in doing my own research before, as I was writing my first book in the early 90s. I opened up, I think it was a National Geographic, and it was a picture like this. And I went, good Lord, the heart starts down in the belly. I didn't know that. I mean, it was an amazing picture, but actually might have been earlier than this. I couldn't even really make out a face like that in the picture that I had. I looked for that exact picture. It's gone now. I can't find it.
Mm.
But anyway, I knew that, and I'd had the experience of Yohaiza, and so I knew what they were talking about with Zhineng. And so we were very lucky, all of us were, in that my teacher taught me, and then I was able to come teach you, and it landed on rich soil in your case. And I think it had to do with certain character traits in you, that I've already, I mean, I've formally recognized these traits now. And then as I move forward and try to educate and create instructors, the qualities that you exemplified are going to be right up front and center. Um,
Yeah.
and Yeah, I think it's extremely important, and you've learned the lesson, of sexual energy.
Yeah.
Western civilization promotes the wasting of sexual
Yeah.
energy,
Mhm. Absolutely.
and we're rewarded for it. And it's a very strange thing if you think like why. You start asking deep questions about how this happened. It leads you into some very interesting and strange places.